This week, the government is cutting welfare.
And it is not like this in most other comparable countries, where spending on these benefits since the pandemic is either stable or falling, whilst ours continues to inexorably rise. This is the legacy of 14 years of Tory failure. And today, Mr. Speaker, we say no more.
They need more money. They want to spend more on defence, and they're about to break their own self-imposed spending rules. They say that they won't raise taxes, which means that they need to make cuts. And the bill for health-related benefits in particular has been ballooning in recent years and is set to grow even more over the coming years. So they've decided it's time to go for welfare. Despite that growth in spending, these are still some of the biggest cuts to welfare in a decade. So come with me this week as we look at the history of the British welfare state. It's widely considered to be one of the great British achievements of the last couple of centuries, but today it's under strain like never before. So, how did we get here? It's a journey that's going to take us through Dickensian London, through the Second World War, through Thatcher's Britain, and through the COVID pandemic. This is History Counts. Before the welfare state, in Britain, if you were poor, you were effectively on your own. The government didn't provide benefits, pensions, healthcare, anything really. Instead, there was something called the Poor Law. That was a law created in 1834 amidst the economic downturn at the end of the Napoleonic Wars. It formalised the system of workhouses made famous by Charles Dickens in novels like Oliver Twist, which you probably are familiar with. They were grim places. If you couldn't pay your bills, if you couldn't pay your debts, then you and your whole family were sent to these workhouses and forced to work pretty menial jobs in order to receive shelter and food. They were designed to be as grim as possible so that only those who were truly desperate would ever really go there. By 1930, 100 years later, many of these workhouses were being phased out. Campaigners were demanding a much fairer system. And as the 1930s ended, the world was tipped into the Second World War. And that changed everything. In 1942, as war raged, a British economist called William Beveridge laid out a radical plan. A system that would provide free healthcare, unemployment support and pensions for everybody. As the war ended, Britain found itself in a reforming mood. It voted in the Labour government of Clement Attlee with a huge landslide. Attlee and his cabinet embraced Beveridge's recommendations and set about making them a reality. In 1948, they launched the NHS. Unemployment benefits and council housing soon followed. The welfare state, as we know it now, was born. For the first time, being poor didn't mean being abandoned. But the big question remained. Could Britain really afford it? Most historians will tell you that the 1950s and the 1960s were the golden age of the welfare state, and in many ways they were. The council housing stock grew massively. The NHS was treating millions from cradle to grave. But the 1970s saw a significant worsening in economic conditions in Britain. Inflation was sky high, unemployment was rising, the economy was barely growing. That made the welfare state more expensive and therefore much harder to pay for. It was in this context that Britain underwent another political revolution. In 1979, Margaret Thatcher was elected, and during her decade in power, she set about shrinking the welfare state. She sold off council houses, made the rules that governed how you got benefits stricter. Her critics thought it was cruel. Her champions thought it was necessary. By the turn of the millennium, Labour, under Tony Blair, was back in power. To some degree, he began to expand the welfare state once again. He introduced tax credits, the minimum wage, and boosted spending on the NHS. But that so-called new Labour project was stopped in its tracks by the 2008 financial crash. 2010 saw the election of a Tory-led coalition government, and they pursued a series of deep cuts to the size of the British state. This, of course, was austerity. Benefits were cut, council services were cut, and universal credit was introduced, which melded together many of the old welfare state benefits. The idea was to reduce the size of the state, make it more efficient, and reduce the size of the deficit, the amount of money the government spends more than the amount of money that it brings in. But history, as ever, had other ideas. In 2020, the COVID pandemic hit. The institutions of the welfare state were needed as perhaps never before. Universal credit was temporarily boosted. The NHS saw tens of billions of extra pounds poured into it. But this was soon followed by the cost of living crisis. Inflation hit 10%, and more people came to rely on food banks, something which became a symbol of the extent to which people in Britain were now living in poverty and needed help more than ever. And that's largely the situation we find ourselves in now. Hundreds of thousands of people sit on NHS waiting lists. The poorest in Britain are now poorer than the poorest in some Eastern European countries, a situation 25 years ago that would have been totally unthinkable. The number of people on health-related benefits who can't work because of long-term sickness is growing massively and has grown since the end of the pandemic. Some people think the answer to this is more money, that more money is needed in the institutions of the welfare state. The government clearly feel that cuts are in order. The only thing that everybody does just about agree on is that the welfare state is under strain like almost never before. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please do like and subscribe. We'll be back next week.